Hi, brothers and sisters. Welcome to season, I think, 17 of the Lunch Lecture series. Promises to be another good year, second Thursday of every month at 12:15. An introduction that needs to be made first. Brother Eric Elliott, interim archivist here. You'll be hearing from him later in the fall, but I want you to know him. He's a delightful addition to our family here at the Archie Davis Center. So glad to have you, Eric.
Nice to be here.
Our lecturers this morning are Music Foundation Cataloging Project staff Dave Blum and Assistant Director Gwyn Michel, and they're going to talk with you all about editing music. So enjoy.
Hello, everyone. This is a talk that was given during the festival this summer, and so that's the genesis of this talk. Let's see if this works. There we go. So, how do you get from manuscripts that look like that through the process of using music software like Finale or Sibelius, and we're not going to talk about any of the intricacies of doing any of that, but get through that process to a published work. And I want to specify that we're going to only be talking about publications in the Moravian Star Anthem series. There are now 74 of these in our publication series. What we won't be talking about are some of the scholarly editions. Gwyneth, if you hold up these as samples.
Here's
the Easter Cantata, Stegline, and then some of the Michel music, wind music that Nola did some years ago. So we won't be talking about those kind of publications. We're just talking about what ends up being in our Anthem series. And before I get started, I want to talk about some of the things I'm going to touch on, including the Music Foundation's editorial policies, which are on our website. If you print the whole thing out, it's about 5 pages. I'll show you in kind of the executive summary of the editorial policies. Gemeincat, near and dear to my heart, since I'm working on the cataloging project, and how to find manuscripts and German script courses. The one that I took is the one up in Bethlehem. There is now one here in Winston-Salem, very similar from what I understand. So there are website addresses for German script courses. Tools that are online, like Bible Gateway, which feature different translations of the Bible, many in English and other languages, including the Luther translation in German, and then German language resources. The editorial policies, as I said, are on the website. They're about 5 pages of detailed instructions about how to go about assessing your manuscript, how to go about putting together a score. And here's the kind of the executive summary of what needs to be the result of that process. A full score, set of parts including the realization of any figure bass, if there's any there, putting together a vocal keyboard score, the text in the original language, most of the time, of course, German, and a translation, description of the specific issues addressed in the edition. This might include, is it a scripture translation? If so, what is it? Where did it come from? What collection did it come from? And then some of the standard information provided for each edition, which includes sponsorship information. We'll talk about that later. One good thing to start with is the catalog. You can use the catalog to find manuscripts, and there are lots of ways to search. You don't have to use any of these 2-letter symbols ahead of your search. You can just start putting in words. Be aware that you're searching the whole world unless you get to the next screen and specify, I only want to look in the Moravian Music Foundation catalog.
What does NT stand for?
Note. So AU is author, TI title, SU subject, KW keyword, which is kind of the default. If you don't use any of those things, it's just a keyword search, and then something that appears in the notes field. I mentioned German script courses. It's a good idea to have a good reading knowledge of German going into one of these script courses. They're offered every summer, right?
Yes.
At the archives in Bethlehem. And they've started to be offered here in Winston-Salem. Bible Gateway is something that I use. It helps to get a good background on the scriptures. Many of the sources are settings of scripture. And then you can easily say, okay, I found it in the German translation. What is it in another English translation? And when you want to start your translating, it's good to see all the different English translations of the same verse. You want to make the translation as literal as possible, but you also want to make it as musical as possible. And so finding different translations will help you with words that you can use. Some online language sources. Here's this Beolingus, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Another one that's online is called leo.org. But it's a good idea to have some good German dictionaries on hand, whether it's a hard copy of Collins or Cassel or Langenscheidt or something like that. But there are online dictionaries as well. Again, on Gemeincat, you can search by scripture reference. Here is an example of searching the subject, John 3:16. Note that the chapters are in Roman numerals and the verses are in Arabic numerals. If you go back, you see on the bottom, it says Access Online. That is a link from our catalog records to RISM. On our catalog, there is a lot of bibliographic information about the manuscripts, but there's no musical incipit. But if you have this link to an Access Online, you'll see the RISM record, and you'll see that it gives you a musical incipit so that you see what the opening lines are musically. So again, how to get from manuscripts, and all the manuscripts, individual manuscripts, are all cataloged. And there's a cataloging record on Gemeincat for each one, to the final publication. And all these final publications are also in our catalog. I'm using as an example the edition that I did of For God So Loved the World, also Hat Gott die Welt geliebt, by Herbst, which is in the Herbst collection and also in the Dover, Ohio collection. And this is an example of the manuscript from the Herbst collection. Herbst had his collection are 99% full scores. And they're very neat, as you can see. Very easy to read. Although he had his bad days, as you can see. And here's an example of violin part for the same work from the Dover collection. Congregation collections are usually collections of individual instrument and vocal parts, unlike choral pieces now, octavos, where you see soprano, alto, tenor, bass all together in one part. All you had was your vocal part. And there's an example of that. The other thing to be aware of in that process is note the German text here, geliebt versus geliebet. Part of this, I'm not sure if it's that German wasn't standardized quite yet. If that's part of it, or the other part of that is that adding or making contractions for German words so that it fit better musically. And here's an organ part for the same work, also from the Dover collection. Organ parts are very useful if you get them in your collection of manuscripts, because it provides a good basis for the keyboard reduction that you're going to have to do as part of what you need to submit. It also helps if you're missing an instrument part, or if you can't read a certain part of an instrument part, you can fill in based on what you see in the organ part. Then you assemble the full score. I use finale. And then it goes from the finale edition to what becomes the printed score. Now, this is a proofreading checklist that Gwyn uses, and as you can see, it's pretty exhaustive. When I submit my edition, I send it to Nola, and she takes a look at it. But this is what, even after I give it to Nola, and she makes her corrections and I make those, this is what I get back from Gwyn. It's not bad enough that she uses a red pen. She uses green and black.
Sometimes variety.
And she'll talk about why she uses different colors. So I think, okay, made all the corrections. There. Is that what is that going to make you happy? Still. So lots of little details need to be ironed out to make it ready for publication. Again, if you're looking for something that you want to edit for a specific occasion, like, hey, I'd really like to do something that was originally done for an August 13th celebration, you can search for August 13th. You can search for daily texts for a certain day. We're adding all that kind of information in the records. And again, going from this record, you see the access online, that it points to a record in the RISM database. Also be aware that there are a lot of texts that multiple composers set. So here are different settings by Latrobe and by Wolf of the same text. I think this is you.
So after Dave has done all his work in editing, and then I finally get to use this. So, so let me just back up and say, for those of you who don't know me, my father was an editor. He was editor actually of the Moravian magazine for about 20 years, and so it is in my blood. There's nothing I can do about it. So he was buried with a red pen in his pocket, and I probably will be too. So here we go. So anyway, so what I'm here to talk about are kind of the technical issues of editing. So we're going to get pretty specific here. So if you don't know what I'm talking about, raise your hand and ask questions, because that's what it's all about. But once I get a work to look at, the first thing I look at is kind of formatting issues. It's because mainly I'm dealing initially with the choral score, so to get from the manuscript to the printed anthem. So I get a proof that is pretty well finished before I look at it, and I'll look at it to see, does this make sense in its present format? Should it be open? In other words, the soprano, alto, tenor, bass each have their own line, or is it easier to read in closed score? So And if you look at this is a piece, all of the examples we're using today were sung at the festival this summer. So this was very familiar to half the choir, or actually 90% of the choir. This is a piece we got from South Africa, and it came to us in open score format, which is what they're used to singing. But if you look at it, it's very homophonic. So we changed it to closed score because it's just easier to read that way. So, and it also gives us fewer pages to have to worry about, which is a big thing. So we now have it in closed score, but sometimes, and we'll get on all this technical stuff later. But that, yeah, I sometimes can go through more than one red pen in a proof. But here we're dealing with layout. Okay, it's now closed score, but this is the first page of music, which means we're turning a page here and we're in the middle of something. So we're in the middle of a phrase. So I asked Nola to change the layout a bit. And this is how it finished coming up. So, and that is easier to read, trust me. So, I'm going to go back to this one before. The other thing with this work is, on this page, I don't know if you can see, but in these two systems, there are actually three voices happening in the treble staff. One is it's soprano, alto, tenor, bass, but the very top thing that's highlighted in yellow is actually a descant. And that's only sung by a very few voices. And so I asked her to give the descant its own line, its own staff. So here, it's much easier to read. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass, and then you've got high voices floating on top. So it's all about legibility and legibility of the printed page, really, is what it's about. So let's see, that's the finished version. Again, layout, and that was the first proof, I believe. I usually number them. But again, it's really pretty clean for a first proof. But here we've got a page turn that we didn't need to have. And here we've got, this was actually really a tight layout. So there are a lot of little notes. There are a lot of 16th notes, some 32nd notes in the, yes, bunches of them in the first system. And my eyes are getting older. And it's hard to read all those little notes. So I asked her to spread it out. And that's where sometimes the green comes in. Red is corrections. Green is changes or questions. Actually, blue is usually questions, but yes, yeah, I do have there is some method in this madness. Not a lot, maybe, but some method in this madness. And the other thing is, I mean, we had blank pages. We had empty pages. I would not ask her to change the layout if it was going to add too many more pages, which would add cost then to the publication. So we have a price point for an 8-page choral, we have a price point for a 12-page choral, and a price point for a 16-page choral. So those are just things that come into play with that. So this was proof 1. Here's finished version, proof 2, proof 3, which I think is a lot easier to read. It's a lot easier for me to play this page than it was the pages before. Still a lot of notes to get into your fingers. Again, so same issues here, layout before and after. Here we have the soprano starting in the middle of a line. Well, they're not paying attention. I don't know. I'm sure all the sopranos in all your choirs are just right on the money. Mine sleep sometimes, so they might miss this entrance, but here at least I can say watch at the end of this line so you know to come in there. So it's making it easier to see. So this is part of that extensive proofreading checklist. There are certain things we look for on different pages. These are the things we look for on the first page of music. And we'll see a little more on the next slide. Title, subtitle, voicing, credits, music credits, text credits, copyright notice, the number, additional product information, tempo headings, etc. So sometimes we should have moved this piano. So title, subtitle, do we have one? You know, if the title's up there in English, we have to make sure it's there in German, and vice versa. And then we forgot to add the voicing, so we added the voicing for the next proof. Credits, double check those, you check the spelling, you check the dates, etc. I was at a concert 2 days ago, and where they did performed Bach, J.S. Bach, and Handel. And this was the Bach Choir concert in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And they had the wrong dates for Handel. Somebody didn't check the program. So these are the things we look for. Double check the dates, and just move there. This is the information about additional products. This is where the orchestration comes. Check the copyright notice, and this is our own number, MMFS, Moravian Music Foundation, full score, and our product numbers are. So the finished number here was
1701.
1701. Is it? Yep, 1701 or 1704? 1701. So it's MMFS, which means it's Moravian Music Foundation score. 17 is the year in which it was published. So the first two numbers relate to the year of publication. And if you go back, the first ones were 09 something. And 01 is the first publication we did in 2017. So they're published consecutively. Unless I get really behind, then which happens sometimes. So again, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at those kinds of credits, tempo heading. Do we know what we have to start with? Or where we need to start. Okay. Here we go, a little bit more. So same deal. Titles. And then here I had a question to her about bring to the Lord your praise of singing. Bring it dem Herrn for Lieder. Herrn is actually bring to the men your joyful songs, and not bring to the Lord. If it were Lord, it would be bring den Herrn. Herrn, not Herrn, without the E. Herrn is Lord. Herren is men. So, but obviously it was Herrn because we needed two syllables, and that's what David Moritz Michael did. So we stuck with it. I did, however, argue with him. So
he never answered.
Yeah, but we stuck with him. So anyway, so those are the kinds of things we're dealing with there. Then we move to the other pages. So. Here, and on the second pages, and you'll see these in subsequent slides. There's always the title is on all of our publications on the top of each page. So I check the title on the first page of music, but you also have to check it throughout. If it's right on page 2, it's right. If it's right on the next page, it should be right on all subsequent pages, but we have to make sure it's right. Page numbers, product numbers, are they there? Brackets and braces, that's the beginning of a system. Clefs, are they there? Are they correct? If it's 4 scores for the chorus parts, is it soprano, alto, tenor, bass? Make sure we've got the right clef for them. Key signatures, time signatures, rehearsal numbers and letters. This is actually fairly automatic. Rehearsal numbers are fairly automatic with the system we have now. But sometimes we want to add additional rehearsal numbers or letters just as a help to people. So, and going then from the top down, vocal staves, you have to check each voice part, obviously, all the way down. Soprano, alto, tenor, bass. Is there an additional voice part? Is there a descant? Double check that. Usually, actually, at this point, before I get to the voices, I go to the accompaniment staff, and because they're the basis. If you don't have the basis, you got to check the voice parts against the basis, against the foundation. If that's wrong, it doesn't matter what these do. so I will do the accompaniment staves, treble, bass, down. Are there additional instruments? Double check that. Are we using chord symbols? That doesn't usually happen in our music, but it can. Figured bass can happen. And then I'll go back and do the vocal staves, and you're checking. You're obviously checking against the original part, but you're checking kind of horizontally because they're individual parts, but you're also checking vertically. So you have to make sure that what the soprano sings is what's happening, goes along with what's happening in the piano or whatever, in the orchestra. So we do the accompaniment, we do the vocal staves, and then I go back and do text, and usually there's two languages. So obviously you have to check each language. You check for capitalization, syllabification, are the words divided correctly? And just a clue here, hymnals are notorious for having incorrect hyphenation. So just notorious. So that's where I just go to the dictionary. I mean, that's actually where the German online thing comes into handy. So, and then punctuation, is it correct? Tempo headings, indications, etc. Dynamics, slurs, tides. We'll get into slurs a little bit, and then labels. Is it really the soprano part, or is it an alto part, or is it a tenor part? Just make sure that's all notes. So those are the kinds of things we look at. Key signatures, do they matter? For those of you who read music, and I don't know if you can see through all this red here, but I'm asking for that B flat to be deleted. I'm asking for that B flat to be deleted. Same thing there. Because if you look at this piece, it's in F major, right? It wasn't written originally in F major. It was written without a key signature, but it really is in F major. So we added the key signature, and look what we got rid of. All those extra little red stuff is gone. Okay. And the other thing while we're here is, we'll get into this a bit later, is also, I have a green indication here, and that's to change this beaming, because you have to indicate what notes belong with what beat. So, and we'll make it a little easier later. Key signatures, do they matter? Yes. So here's an example of some, they're accidentals all over the place. And we simplified that by adding the key signature there. So, and I think the right hand is, the right side is a lot easier to read. Beaming, again, you have to be able to visually separate the beats one from each other. In 4/4 time, you can beat by groups of twos or groups of four. So, but they should match. And here these are all beamed together, so I asked that those be done likewise. Here, so that's generally for 4/4 time. This is in 2/4. It's a slow 2/4. There's a whole bunch of notes happening. But we needed to be able to see beats 1 and 2, visually separate beats 1 and 2. I told you it was going to get technical. I'm sorry.
Well, see, the biggest tension comes is that when I do an original edition,
right,
what I tend to put in the beaming is exactly what the composer wrote.
Correct.
Which might not be the clearest for today's readers to read. So I send to Gwyn, this is how the composer beamed it, and she says, yeah, but that's not what we're going to keep.
Right.
So in some of our file copies here, we will have transcribed exactly what the composer said and keep that on file. But what we're going to publish is what Gwyn determines is easier for today's musicians to sing from.
Right. Because, and until what, at least late 19th century, if not earlier 20th century, if you were looking at vocal beaming, every syllable was its own note. So these 2 eighth notes, which are now beamed together, would have been flagged, they would have been separated. But that changed about, I don't know, 50s, 60s. So just again, really to make the page less cluttered, to make it easier to read. And you're right, I do argue, I argue with the poor dead composers. So, and this is just an example of before the beaming thing, and then here. So here you can, here it looks like, I'm not sure if this measure is in 4/4 or in 6/8, if you look at that. But here it's very clearly 1, 2, 3, 4. So anybody doesn't understand that, ask me afterwards, okay? There are certain idiosyncrasies we find, I name them idiosyncrasies, we find in Moravian music. One is what I call shorthand. If you look at these notes, they're half notes with a line through the stem. Who knows what that means? Besides, okay, besides the editors in the room. That means those are actually eighth notes. Those are repeated eighth notes. So this translates to that. Actually, that is this measure. That's right there. So, and unless you know how to read 18th century notation, you're not going to maybe not know what that means. Or if you're a recording session player.
So is that like a basso continuo line where
Yeah, exactly. Another thing is what do we include in the choral publication and what do we exclude? When they're making the choral score, the accompaniment version of the choral score, they're actually creating a reduction of the orchestra, or the full orchestration. So what do you include and what do you leave out? Most of the time we try to include it as much as we possibly can, but you have to keep in mind that this is going to be played by hands on the piano, and my hands are very small. So you can't always have every note in the choral score that you have in the orchestration. Here, however, there was kind of an empty space which left the poor altos all by themselves. So I said to Nola, can we fill in the harmony a little bit more here to help out the altos, which she did. So, and that's, I mean, she didn't just make up that note, it was in the orchestration. So we just added that, went back and added it. Another thing are slurs, and the way we approach slurs, vocal slurs, in our publication are according to the line of text. The top line of text, whether it's English or German, the full slur will follow the top line of text. Here, God has plohoth mihi. I don't know if you can see that. Plohoth mihi. But if you look at the second line of text, then they get the dotted slur. So the second line of text is den hat mich an. So you can see the difference here. Here's English and here's German. Make sense? You see that? So, I mean, sometimes it might look a little confusing, but if it's explained. Note duration. Okay, this happens quite often, actually. There will be different note durations for different voice parts. If you look at this, just this one chord vocally, the soprano and the alto have half notes, and the tenor and the bass, or actually I think this is SSAB, the alto and the bass have quarter notes. Now, this is what's in the part, what's in the originals, because that's what we're transcribing from. But shouldn't these be the same? They should. So we'll change that in the final publication. And basically, I think our parts are incredibly accurate. They really, really, truly are. these are the kinds of things that happen occasionally, but they happen, and I think they happen because we had individual parts. They're writing very quickly, and they didn't always look to see, oh, whoops, I ended that phrase with a half note. I want the basis to end on an F, and that's all they really need to know. And if I'm waving my arms to cut everybody off, they'll all cut off together. So there you go.
In theory.
In theory, yes, of course. And appoggiatures is something we come across in Moraviandom a lot. So that's where you've got the kind of the accented grace note on the beat, and just make sure they're there, make sure they're all the same. Is it a appoggiatura? Is it a grace note? That kind of thing. Dynamics. I said what I wanted to say on this slide is dynamics, add them, okay? So I think when Moravian works, usually if you find dynamics, you'll find them in the instrumental parts. You will rarely find them in the vocal parts. And so when we do additions, when we finally get to the point where it gets to me, it's very clean without dynamics. So we don't know how they wanted to sing it. So then we add those. We don't add them indiscriminately. We just if there is something, obviously we'll base the vocal parts on what we see in the instrumentation.
And if there are dynamics, they're usually inside the piece. They don't start with an initial dynamic for the piece.
Right. So there we go. And so I mean, basically, I think I'm going to back up a little bit here. So it's very nitty-gritty what we do, but I think to me it's an editor's job to make the music as both from scholarly edition and performing edition, to make the music as approachable as possible, make it as much sense as possible to you, and it's an editor's job to make sure everybody's on the same page and that the page is decipherable. So, back to Dave.
Now, I mentioned earlier that each manuscript is cataloged, has its own unique number, shelf number, and that all the finished publications, once they're in this format, are all cataloged too, and so you'll find those in the catalog. You'll actually find there are intermediate steps, and they're all cataloged too. These are pre-publication. These are things that have been edited. They've gone through NOLA, they've gone through Gwyn. All we're waiting for is sponsorship, and they'll become a publication like this. We've got a bunch of these. I've got one binder here. I've got 3 more binders down in my office. But all the records for each one of those you'll find in Gemeincat. So there are sponsorship opportunities. There are also editing opportunities. Something else I've done, started years ago, put together an access database in which I took all the publications that have been published through the Music Foundation, through Boosey and Hawkes and H.W. Gray and Hinshaw and Brott and all those different publishers that we published through over the years. All those things are in our catalog, number 1. I've brought them together, and they're in bound volumes in the library, so we've got just about everything ever published over 50-some years. But I also put it in a database, and I index those things to scriptures. Where I could, identify them with scriptures that are in the Revised Common Lectionary. And so that is something we're looking to put on the website sometime in the future. So if you're a choir director and you want to find a Moravian anthem for a certain biblical text or for a certain time of year, you'll be able to go through and find that. What also is, I think, useful here is finding out where do we need other anthems. There are times of the church year we don't have any Moravian anthems, and so it shows you an opportunity if you want to do editing. Surprisingly, some Sundays in Lent are not represented by our publications. Epiphany is notorious for being difficult to find anthems for. The most frustrating thing for me for years has been trying to find something for Transfiguration Sunday. It happens every year. It's always the same text. Let's get some music for Transfiguration Sunday. So, editing opportunities. And I mentioned sponsorship opportunities, so there's that. Now, before the festival happened, NOLA put together a showcase that it amounts to the Cliff Notes version of this presentation. It's downstairs on the first floor. So take a look at that. If you don't have time today, come back Sunday for our open house. Sunday afternoon, we're having an open house.
12 to 5 p.m.
You want to do more of a commercial on that?
Sure. 12 to 5 p.m. Sunday. We will be open. There will be musical presentations at 1:30, 2:30, and 3:30. We will do tours of the vault so you can get to see the original manuscripts of some of these pieces and just get to know what's here. We have some discounts on sale items on our publications and recordings, so come do your Christmas shopping. See you Sunday afternoon. Okay?
Thank you.
Is that it? Okay, thank you.